I come to you today to say that we can build a newer and better nation. I say we can do so, that we must do so, and that we will do so.
The 1960s was a time for change in America, as a new age of activists were determined to make societal changes. People were taking to the streets in protest of the escalating Vietnam War. In California, the United Farm Workers Association were on a grape strike, and Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were speaking out on civil rights. Amidst this transformation, a hero would emerge. Robert Francis Kennedy was born in 1925 to the elite and wealthy Kennedy family. Bobby graduated from Milton Academy and, like the majority of his siblings, attended Harvard University. In 1952, Kennedy began to work for Senator Joe McCarthy, trying to expose communists and the U.S. government. Disagreeing with McCarthy's methods, Kennedy left the committee. Then in 1959, Robert Kennedy began to manage his brother's 1960 campaign for President of the United States. He worked 18-hour days, driving himself to gain supporters, taking on difficult jobs which his brother often ignored, such as giving campaign speeches to lower-class areas. The hard work and sleepless nights paid off, as John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Robert Kennedy was appointed as U.S. Attorney General, and during this time he supervised intense issues. Some of the major matters included the Bay of Pigs invasion of 1961, the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, and the escalating war in Vietnam. Bobby was branded as ruthless and cruel when he conducted a relentless pursuit on the corrupt Teamsters Union president Jimmy Hoffa. While Bobby continued to remain one of his brother's most trusted and loyal advisors, politicians and citizens alike feared the merciless Attorney General. Tragically, on November 22nd of 1963, everything changed when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. On this day, Bobby lost his brother, his best friend, and his purpose. Following the assassination, Kennedy fell into a dark stage in his life, full of emotion and guilt. This tragic event prompted Kennedy to begin his advocacy for those without a voice. Kennedy ran for the United States Senate in New York in 1964 and won. A year later, the Delano, California grape strike began for better work conditions. In April 1966, Senator Kennedy went to Delano for a subcommittee hearing on the grape strike. Bobby listened to the Kern County Sheriff, Leroy Galen, testify about arresting peaceful strikers.
How can you go arrest somebody if they haven't violated the law?
They're ready to violate the law. In other words,
Could I suggest in the interim period of time, in the luncheon period of time, that the sheriff and the district attorney read the Constitution of the United States?
Kennedy visited strikers on the picket line, speaking with them along with farm worker leader Cesar Chavez. Bobby Kennedy was the first national figure who embraced the plight of the grape strikers, triumphantly bringing attention to their cause.
I think Bobby found Cesar Chavez to be one of the most impressive leaders he had met, and he was just very impressed by the fortitude that Chavez showed in the face of really incredible odds. And he felt that no one was helping these people, and if he could do his little part to lend them some of his authority, then he did that.
In 1967, there was a series of government programs that supported the war on poverty that were set to expire. In an attempt to make the nation aware of the need for continued funding, the United States Senate on Labor Subcommittee of Poverty held a series of hearings. One of the first witnesses that testified was Marian Wright of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund in Mississippi. She testified that there was an increase in Mississippi of families with little to no income and that many were starving. Kennedy wanted to see firsthand how bad things really were, so on April 10, 1967, Kennedy traveled to the Mississippi Delta. What he saw shocked him. He witnessed the painful and tragic consequences of poverty and generations of people exploited by oppression. Kennedy glimpsed at the very real pain and struggle within Mississippi. He concluded that, as long as there is plenty, poverty is evil.
Talking to children who had just had molasses to eat, a little molasses to eat for the day, or a little bit of rice, and they weren't going to have anything else, that day and seeing the sores on their bodies or how skinny they were, he just couldn't shake those memories. He couldn't shake what he saw, and I think that really motivated him.
Returning to Washington, D.C., he met with Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman, angrily criticizing the food stamp program. He demanded the subcommittee send a letter to President Johnson about the conditions of malnutrition and hunger in the Mississippi Delta, imploring him to declare it an emergency. Eventually, Kennedy managed to amend the renewal of the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 to include a $10 million emergency fund to be established for food and medical services. Despite resistance from other Southern legislators and a lack of support from President Johnson, the bill triumphantly passed. Bobby continued to attack poverty issues by investigating and publicizing impoverished conditions across America. In early 1968, Cesar Chavez began a hunger strike to stop violence being used on peaceful UFW protesters. On March 10th, Bobby again traveled to Delano, California to support Chavez in the struggle for justice. Bobby became very close to Chavez after their first meeting and wanted to do everything in his ability to support his cause. There were thousands in Delano who were celebrating Chavez's strike, but he was too fragile to address the crowd, so Bobby did for him. After his speech, Bobby joined Chavez to break bread, ending the 25-day fast. Bobby became tremendously influenced by the courage of Chavez. 10 days later, on March 16, 1968, an eager and inspired Robert F. Kennedy announced his presidential campaign. Although entering the race 4 months late, Kennedy ran a strong campaign, and to the surprise of many, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced that he would be withdrawing from the presidential election. Throughout the race, Bobby had received constant assaults from Eugene McCarthy, who was critical of Kennedy's stance regarding Vietnam. However, Kennedy made it clear that the Vietnam War was not his primary focus. During this time, racial violence within America continued to escalate, and a national tragedy occurred with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. On April 4, 1968, Bobby, like many, viewed King as a hero to humanity. Only hours after he had been assassinated, Bobby delivered a speech which captured the nation. He stepped onto a flatbed truck and spoke to a largely African-American crowd in Indianapolis, who were completely unaware that Reverend King had been killed. Bobby was determined to give a eulogy to inform the American people of this tragic loss.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
In June of 1968, Kennedy flew to California for the Democratic primary. It was an extremely critical state to win. Many believed this win might influence McCarthy to drop from the race, clearing a path to the presidency. Kennedy toured the state and made appearances in the poor areas as well. On June 5, 1968, Bobby won California and made his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Bobby and his supporters celebrated the triumphant win, signaling a turning point in the Democratic presidential race. It was a perfect moment for all involved in the campaign, until tragedy struck.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible? Is that possible?
Robert F. Kennedy was declared dead at 1:44 a.m. on June 6, 1968. This tragic and abrupt loss tore the hearts of the people in America. The death of Bobby Kennedy left many to believe that violence had become a permanent infection within society. Bobby had committed himself to changing not only the government, but society. Despite the odds which were against him, he never gave up on this belief. His triumph in life was his long-lasting and continuing effect on the pursuit of social justice. Tragically, Kennedy did not live to see his dreams of an equal America, and today's society still struggles with discrimination and racial violence. Kennedy's dream continues to inspire people today that a better nation can be built. He was a rare, political leader who spoke for the people often ignored and unified all despite their differences. Kennedy's triumphant ideas of wanting to change the world for the better will always beat the evil that lingered after his death. As Robert Kennedy once said, "Tragedy is a tool for the living to gain wisdom, not a guide by which to live."
Because he had a vision and he had ideas that were beyond his years. If we took some of those ideas and reflected on them, I really think we'd be living in a better world.